Hello, and welcome to Psychology Demystified. Today's topic is all about arguing. To argue or not to argue? That is the question. I'm going to start by saying something pretty odd, and that is the fact that arguments are not undesirable. They're not. So in simple fact, arguments are a way of settling disputes without someone getting physically injured. Humans are known to argue, but sometimes they do not do this in an effective manner. Granted, because you have to live with people, there are times when you pick and choose your battles. There are times when you tell yourself, you know what, this is not worth fighting for. Unfortunately, at work, we can't get as angry as we want to. So there's some instances where our anger may not be as embraced as it ideally should be. But in your home, among people who know you, that is not the place to stifle your anger. People enter into arguments, whether large or small, all the time. The reason why people argue, or the purpose of arguments, is because someone is trying to clearly express what view they hold, where they stand, or what it is that they strongly believe in, and they want it to come across clearly to someone else. If someone's vaguely annoyed, there's a high likelihood that when they argue, their tone will come across as a vaguely annoyed one. If they're enraged, there's a high likelihood that their tone will come out as enraged. In an ideal situation, when people argue, everyone should come out with some kind of graded response, where if a partner notices that the other person is truly passionate about something, they may decide to have a way to compromise. In what is considered a good relationship, a spouse may decide to compromise if they realize that their partner is really and truly passionate about a topic. What then happens in this same relationship is that the next time, if the other partner is passionate about their topic, then there's compromise happening. However, there are instances where there's a large argument, and that's when both parties feel very strongly about where they stand. In a situation like this, it's not going to be easy for one of them to then say, yeah, actually, I see where you're coming from. You're right. No, because at that point in time, they're truly passionate about what they're trying to portray and what they're trying to bring across. If arguing is inevitable, how can we make sure that we're arguing the right way? So here are some no-nos when it comes to arguing. Wrong way number one. One person tries to dominate the other. This kind of arguing has nothing to do with trying to bring across your strong point. It has more to do with trying to establish who is the boss. This is the kind of argument where resentment can really build. And then what happens is that there are some instances where you find someone trying to outshout the other. Wrong way to argue number two. Name calling. No one in an argument should call the other a name if they want the other person to keep listening. As soon as name calling or insults become part of the argument is lost. It's best to just quit it and regroup at a better time when you're not tempted to start spitting on each other, because you know what? This has happened in some therapy sessions. Wrong way to argue number three. There should be no physical threats when you are arguing. This also involves the process of seeming like you're out of control, where you punch a wall or you kick something or you throw something. That's an out of control argument, and there's no need to continue with this one because it's not going anywhere other than the emergency room. Wrong way to argue number four. Bringing up the past, attacking someone's character, or choosing to compare them to someone who they don't want to be compared to, especially when they're in a frame of mind where they are angry. Some people use this line, oh my goodness, you are just like your mom. Men use that sometimes to bring a woman or put her in her place, and that one for some reason elicits rage like you cannot believe. Undesirable argument number five, nagging. This is highly undesirable. If a partner in a relationship understands and knows how a spouse feels, a lot of times that is all that is needed and that is all that is necessary, even if the outcome is not a satisfactory one. Sulking. Sulking is not really meant to portray a message, it's just meant to punish the other person. And truth be told, people who sulk just tend to be people who sulk repeatedly. If you are the sulker, you'll notice that the person who's reacting to your sulking has gone through different stages and phases of how they react to you. At first, when the sulking started, they would come and check in on you and see whether you're doing okay. Eventually, you might have noticed that you were allowed to just sit and stew in your sulky moments for a while. The final stage of this, dear sulkers, is that the person you're sulking for will eventually stop asking you why you're sulking, because at some point, they stop caring because it's repeated and it's tiring and they're bored of it and they're over it. There's no way I'd give you a whole bunch of don'ts and not give you a couple of do's when it comes to arguing. So with that said, let's get started with number 1. Keep it logical. A lot of times when you're arguing, because there are certain chemical things happening within you, you end up becoming emotional. If you try and keep your arguments logical, then you end up sticking to the point more, and then your argument, your point, your emphasis comes across more clearly because you kind of tone down the emotional and focus mainly on the facts. The next thing when you're arguing, another do, is please always use I statements. I statements are, for example, I feel sad when this doesn't happen. Not, you make me feel so sad when you do, because as soon as you do that, as soon as you jump into the you do and you do and you, it becomes a blame game as opposed to an expression of how you feel. So I statements are very important when you're arguing, because then you're talking about how you end up feeling. This one kind of piggybacks on one I'd mentioned earlier on the don'ts. Again, don't bring up the past. Yes, I know there's some people who manage to keep everything in a vault in their heads and keep track of what someone said 15 years ago. But at that point in time, that is not the time to dig into the vault if you want to be seen as someone who is focused on the moment. So when you're arguing, don't dredge up everything you can from the past, because then you just end up sounding like you're complaining. Another way to argue, another definite do, is always remember to listen. And when someone needs clarification, please clarify so that they can fully understand what you're trying to say. One of the main reasons people argue is because they don't understand each other. If there's any point of misunderstanding in a conversation, in a tone, in a look, an argument can start. So once you clarify so that someone understands where you're coming from, why you said what you said, why you did what you did, then maybe there will be a point of mutual understanding that will make someone see that there's simply a misunderstanding and that you can move on from it from there. Another thing to do is agree to find a resolution, which means try and figure out what the way forward is once you are done with your argument and once you've reached a compromise. And even when you haven't reached a compromise, try and see if together you can chart a way forward so that you can move on until you do eventually find the compromise. As a fact, sometimes you just have to agree to disagree. Sometimes when you're arguing, you have to realize when it's time to take a time out, which means pause the argument, do something else, and come back to the argument. Sounds weird, but you know what? It works. It really does. And all in all, you know what? You have to ask yourself, is this worth the argument? What are we actually arguing over? What are we actually fighting about? Does it really have to be an argument? Ask yourself that, because sometimes we're angry at other things in our lives and we find the person who's closest to us and we use them almost as our punching bag for that moment and get into the silliest arguments. And then if someone were to ask us 10 minutes later what we're arguing about, both people, both parties might have no idea. So is the argument worth it? Showing understanding and showing empathy goes a long way. So once an argument is done, telling someone that you can see where they're coming from or that you understand what their point is means a lot. A lot. When you argue, and if you really mean it, it always helps to say I'm sorry, but only if you mean it. Saying I'm sorry if you mean it is part of owning up and taking responsibility for what you may have said. For example, if your comment was off color and someone wasn't too amused by it, you could simply say, I'm sorry for the comment I made. I didn't mean it to come across as this. Because that can be truly powerful. And those are some of the strongest words in the English language. And they have been known to stop major arguments. So if you really mean it, please apologize. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to be kind because you really do not know what someone's going through. And to you, hugs and kindness always. Bye.